Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to have you here, and really exciting with this opportunity to talk to Mariaelena, who is here for a couple of weeks with us. Mariaelena has been working with us, with Dianti, in one of our projects called The Empirics of Hope, and maybe you heard Mariaelena's talk in November, year and a half ago. But this time we thought we will take this opportunity to go a little bit deeper into your work and the processes that you have engaged with, sort of some of the challenges and the things that you've learned in connecting with different groups. And I thought there's also an opportunity for us here. Many of us are trying to cross different knowledge barriers or boundaries, or try to work across knowledge systems, basically. So what we're going to do is going to listen to Mariaelena's talk, which is like 25 minutes, half an hour. Then there's time for questions and so going deeper and digging into some of the things that you've been talking about. But also we thought that this is an opportunity for you to share your experiences. To what extent do they sort of contrast with Mariaelena's experiences? And hopefully we can have a conversation in this group. I think we're not too many, so we can have a conversation in the entire group about what we have learned and what we can share and how we can improve crossing different knowledge barriers between different groups of society. Mariaelena Huambachano is a social... Sorry? Huambachano.
Yeah.
Is a social professor at Syracuse University and been working in Peru and New Zealand and lots of other places. Please.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for the kind introduction. Ayim Punchai, Sutimi Mariaelena, Monta Cani, Peru. Greetings, everyone. Tena koto katoa, Roneira Roreira. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, and it's been a pleasure to be hosted by the Hub in Anthropocene, and it's been lovely to talk with colleagues, and much gratitude to Henrik Osterblom, Kayoko Komosaka, Cynthia Flores, and Maria Dianti, and Peter, who are here and who made this possible. So thanks so much, Dianti and the team. I'm going to start with, it's a kind of prayer that we always use when it comes to giving a talk, because this is a space of knowledge. In my culture, when you come into a space, it's just not me coming to this space, but it's my ancestors with me here. And the same when you're coming into this space, I'm greeting you and all your ancestors. So we'll start with Mama Kiyata, Taita Inti, Huyurkunata, Chainayatak, Yakumama, Wairatawatan, Anchatan, Naipikusan, Kamkaskaikita, Rimaikita, Yachakimaimanta, Yapayam, Urakunuman. This prayer embodies gratitude for Pachamama, Mother Earth, and our spiritual ancestors that are here with us, the sun, the moon, the stars, the waters, the wind, and who are allowing us to share knowledge and encourage one another to thrive and flourish together. Well, thank you for having me here. Today I have the pleasure to talk about my Wawa, my baby book. As my first book, as Henrik mentioned, I am an associate professor at Syracuse University and the Department of Native and Indigenous Studies, and I'm also linked to food studies, geography, and other public and policy centers. I'm going to start by telling you a story, the story of my book, so that we'll understand about my background before I explain you. I thought we'll start with a story. So the story of my book and my story begins with me traveling, immigrating to Aotearoa, New Zealand in 1998 with my younger sister, Patty. And we were very, very young. I was back then 18, she was 14. We immigrated to Aotearoa without even thinking what the country would provide us, and especially being able to connect with Maori and learn out about the culture, create this unique bond between us. And between this time, my sister and I were traveling, and it is within this period, early on, when I moved to Aotearoa, that I met this lovely Maori during my trips. It was my sister who asked me if I knew about a precious food crop called the kumara. So here you will see the kumara or a sweet potato. And of course I said, yes, I know. Camote in Spanish. And I said, I know, that's camote. It's come from South America. And he looked at me and said, I don't know about that. And it highlighted that he was telling me in his travel stories, in the many proverbs, and very ingrained in their culture is the story of the kumara that come from his ancestors, Maori in Polynesia. And of course, we have stories about our kamote and our own traditions. So after talking and learning about each other's traditions, it emerged this understanding that the kumara or the corn or the potatoes are precious gifts, are our gifts given to us by the ancestors, and we have a responsibility to look after and preserve that. So the story of the book begins with that. And so my trajectory, I enrolled in the Bachelor of International Business, focusing mostly on the globalization of food systems, sustainable food systems. The master's degree focused on the agricultural sector of Peru and New Zealand, focusing on sustainability. Always try to do this comparing because I wanted to understand more about the unique knowledge systems of Quechua and Maori. My doctoral study focused specifically on Maori and Quechua knowledge systems and understanding food security from an indigenous perspective. So that was my PhD, and the book only contains 5% of my PhD because the next 8 years to 10 years was again discovering and unearthing the knowledge of Quechua, Maori, and other indigenous communities. So this is how the book and my journey began, to understand deeply about indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, to highlight that it is context specific. As we all know, traditional ecological knowledge is a concept that is widely acknowledged and accepted, and we have Carl Falk, who is a prominent scholar in that area, that allow us to be able to understand more and be able to highlight the knowledge and the valuable legacy that our ancestors have left to us. Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge highlights that knowledge is place-based, context-specific. That's why we don't want to generalize. And there's dynamic and constantly evolve from one generation to the other. I appreciate being able to be in Aotearoa, where I was able to discuss about methodologies and how my struggle being an indigenous scholar, developing this indigenous research project, but being confronted with Western methods, and how I spent a year trying to make it work, trying to develop a Western methodology to fit with my indigenous research project. And it got to the point that I just couldn't do the work, in the sense of, I understand that we need secondary literature, and it was useful for me to understand the gap in the literature, but it's not enough. And that's what I understood based on my work. It's not enough because you need to go and talk to those communities, build relationships. So it took me a good 2 years of going back and forth in various tribes in the Amazon of Peru, in the highlands of Peru, also in Aotearoa, in the North Island, being able to understand and connect. The literature were telling me there were issues with water security. Our glaciers keep on shrinking. We knew that there was a definitely big issue. But when I went to the field, it was mostly about food issues, sustainable food security. Water definitely is important, but it was more about the degradation of the soil, the impacts of climate change. So those trips really helped me to build relationship, but more importantly, to develop a framework with and for the benefit of those communities. At that time, also was grateful to be in Aotearoa, where there are the body of Maori scholarships discussing about indigenous research methodologies. We have Linda Tohiwai Smith, Brian Smith, Leonie Pihama. We have a broad body of scholars. And I was inspired by them. And they set up this nice pathway for us to draw from key principle of the Kapapa Maori, which is a Maori research-based frameworks, key principles of the Kababa Maori, key principles of the Quechua, and they allowed me to develop my own methodology. And I had to also find a metaphor that will allow me to develop this framework. And that's when I went back to those communities, spent an extra few more months trying to find this metaphor. And I found it in the Kipu model. Who had heard about the Kipu? Great. So the Kipu, it's a record-keeping device developed by my ancestors, the Andean people. And every single note, every single thread, they keep precious information from statistics, history, geography. And that will be the Kipo Kamayo, the one that will recite, will provide information to the Inca and to the people who needed that knowledge. So it's a very creative way to communicate knowledge systems. So I use that to develop my methodology. And I use the main code. This is the main code, sustaining and providing the foundation of the research framework to be the one grounding the methodology on indigenous knowledge systems, indigenous research paradigms. And the essence of the Kipu is ethics of engagement, being able to, from early on, these are the pictures like 12 years ago, when I started building connections with people in the highlands of Peru, with the Amazonian people, here the same with wonderful family in Fano and Aotearoa, New Zealand. That's the beginning of how the food garden was back then in 2011, and now has grown and flourished in 2024. There's a wonderful Kama to Mariaelena that focuses on the indigenous agricultural calendars, and they have moved on to do great work. But those are the people that enable me to build those connections and understand about the research gap more profoundly. So ethics of engagement is a core component of the Kipu, and in that building of relationships emerges indigenous worldviews, ethics, cultural humility, understanding. It's not just cultural competence, which most of us take courses on cultural competence, but now we're talking more about cultural humility. It's a lifelong relationships. And Vivian Chavez, a professor in the University of California, she explains beautifully about cultural humility. It's a lifelong process. So my work resonates with Vivian Chavez's work on cultural humility. Accountability is not just being accountable as a researcher, but as an indigenous scholar, I have an insider knowledge and an outsider knowledge, and that it's very ingrained in the work I do. That's why accountability is a key aspect for me, but also for researchers, accountability to those communities and accountability how you disseminate the knowledge that emerges from these projects, and responsibilities that you have with the communities, with academia, with your work. It's just more intentional. The same, those beliefs, values were ingrained in the work with Maori in Aotearoa, with many elders, traditions, cultures, before going into a space, being able to know about every single Maori tribe, for instance, have a different way to begin a ceremony, different food, the same in the highlands of Peru. Just being able to know about Tikanga Maori ethical, cultural values before we start even thinking about interviewing them or asking to do some collaborations. I know it's a long process, but it's a much needed process, because that's when you build relationships, that's when you actually know that the data will be rich and will be valid. And all this knowledge, and thanks to the Kipu model, and you can ask more questions, I can explain more about Kipu, and all that enabled me to develop a research framework that highlighted the best research methods. For instance, talking circles, lots of stories, narratives. I don't call it focus groups or workshops, but I refer to them as talking circles. And many discussions that emerge by sharing food or staying over at someone's house and work, especially working the land. The Kipo model and the research method that I used allowed me to unearth the knowledge systems of the Quechua and Maori, and it highlighted their indigenous philosophies of life. It highlighted that every single community will have their own unique values and belief systems, but underneath it all, there is this philosophy or worldview that everything is holistic. It's a holistic view of the relationships that we have with our human and non-humans are the rivers, the mountains, that are there to preserve the bounty of the land, being able to provide us with food, being able to provide us with shelter, and our responsibility to protect and defend those non-humans that have been violated. We also found many indigenous philosophies of life, and we have in the highlands of Peru, we call it Ayin Cause, Mariaelena in Aotearoa, Minowida Wisdom in North America. We have in a broader general context, the African concept of Ubuntu and the Kofan people in Amazonia region on framework. Also, we have in Chile. So every single indigenous group will have their own indigenous philosophy of life, also depending on the dialect. In my work, something that I've noticed, especially when it comes to food systems, is that the holistic, the spiritual aspect of that, especially in food production, is missing. And in conversation with Quechua and Maori, we always discuss about the holistic well-being to highlight the spiritual essence of the plants, the rivers. Every single non-human being and human being, they have an energy, they have a spiritual power. That's why it's so important to preserve it. And Aotearoa, they call it Maori Ora, which is energy, which is life essence. And in the highlands of Peru, we call it Ayin Cause. So we need to preserve the knowledge, the aura, the energy, the life essence. And that's when we came up with the concept of repatriating holistic collective well-being, meaning being able to bring back all the knowledge, highlighting the spiritual essence, and also the rights of Mother Earth. We prioritize restoring relational ethic, kinship relationships, especially when it comes to food waste, to be able to nurture and flourish all our kin, human and non-human. So in my book, you will hear me discussing about repatriating holistic collective well-being. Within the food sovereignty repatriation, the word repatriation is there to counteract the word repatriation. So repatriation is father, it's nation, something you repatriate that has been taken from you. Repatriation is the nurturing, is bringing back all those seeds that we have lost because of colonization, because of capitalism, bringing back to those communities, bringing back to Mother Earth. It's to counteract the concept of repatriation, we use repatriation. And in my work, repatriating, bringing back the culture, the values, highlighting the holistic and collective essence of living well. What does it mean? And how can we come together to make it happen? It also highlights the value of indigenous food sovereignty. We probably have heard about food security, food sovereignty. Have you heard about indigenous food sovereignty? Yeah, so thank you. So we know the concept of food security, the one that's widely acknowledged by the United Nations, coined in 1996, to ensure that the food is available, accessible. But that concept highlights more about producing food in mass production, focus more on availability. Then the concept of food sovereignty was born in 1996 by the Via Campesina and the large number of small-scale farmers, fisheries, all those communities that came to say, we want food that actually is healthy. We just don't want any food. So it was there to, again, to counteract the liberal understanding of food security. Indigenous food sovereignty, while it resonates with, yes, we need food that's healthy, and also it's a rights-based approach because we as humans deserve to have healthy food, indigenous food sovereignty goes an extra step to highlight that it's not just a human rights-based approach, but also the rights of the non-human, to highlight the cultural aspect of food, the spirituality ingrained in food systems. is to be able to have access to traditional foodways, to be able to reclaim all those seed relatives that we've lost, reclaim all those traditions ingrained in the cuisine that we have, and the food and the practices, eco-cultural values built up over thousands of years and passed on from one generation to the other. And the essence of indigenous food sovereignty is to drive global sustainability transitions. That's what emerged from my work. And we're seeing from the moment I started with my studies back in 2010, 11, to how many communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand, are having their food gardens. We're seeing the revitalization of kumara, more variety of sweet potatoes, more food gardens, more traditions, more ways to preserve the food. The patakakai, which is a Maori creativity where they will use it to preserve the foods in harsh weather conditions. We're seeing more about traditional medicinal plants. We're seeing the usefulness of the kawakawa. Now you go to Aotearoa, you can find kawakawa, piko piko, you can find all these traditional plant and herbal medicine, the same as when you go to the highlands, you will find munya, you will find coca, you will find cereals. Now we're seeing this revival of indigenous traditions, indigenous plants and medicine, which is very exciting from how it started to now. It's great to be able to find those foods that will feed you, not just physically, but also spiritually. As in being able to have access to biodiversity. We're seeing more and more varieties of corn, of potatoes. We're seeing more building of relationships, cross-cultural relationships. We're seeing more Maori coming to Peru, Peruvians traveling to Aotearoa. We're seeing more this building of indigenous global movement that all sparks by having conversations about how we envision our futures, collective futures. One of the contributions of the book, the first contribution is the Kipo model, where I detail in chapter 2 a step-by-step way to develop an indigenous research-based framework that is more ethical and is attuned to the ways of knowing of Quechua and Maori and other indigenous communities. The second contribution is the development of this indigenous food sovereignty framework or policy framework that has 4 areas. I don't know if you can see my belt. So in my belt, I have lots of chacanas. That means all the Southern Cross. So the Southern Cross for the countries in the South Pacific, such as Aotearoa and Peru, it played a key role in the agricultural traditions and systems. It played a key role in telling them the best time to grow food, the best time to do collective activities. So I use, again, the chacana as a metaphor to develop my research framework. And I place it in every single corner of the chacana. Cultural well-being, when we talk about cultural traditions, values, principles, we have manakitanga, the environmental principle of Maori about safeguarding sustainability. We have the ayu, which means self-governance systems. We have other values ingrained in every single tradition. When it comes to environmental well-being, we're talking about the many environmental policies and linked to the values. For instance, Manakitanga, it's about safeguarding the environmental sustainability of Papatunuko, that means land in Maori, and how it has been used in environmental policy, how it's been ingrained. And when you come and go fishing, you must know about Manakitanga, you must know about all the values that you can't go and fish in an area that is taboo, that is sacred, in an area where you know a specific time of the year you're not supposed to go and fish. So all those policy emerging for indigenous practices are ingrained and discussed in environmental well-being, also environmental policies, economies of well-being. Here I discuss about economies of solidarity, economies of love, economies of justice, being able to trade in fairness, as opposed to just having the, being unfair. And I related to what's happening now when it comes to trading, and then you have to think and depend on, the value and exchange rates. And those communities is more about the value of love, how you provide with kindness. It's more about economies built on kindness, solidarity. And actually, those economies have been practiced by many, many indigenous communities. We have the Mayans, we have Mpelis as well. We have in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Aboriginals, Australians as well. We have in Africa. So all those economies have been built on those values and belief systems. We really want to continue. And political well-being, it talks about the policies, the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights. We talk about personhood rights, the rights of nature, or Mother Earth, that has been also placed in constitutions, such as the constitution in Bolivia and Ecuador, and how now all those policies are more ingrained in policy making. So that's the work of my book, to be able to highlight, elevate the knowledge of those indigenous traditions when it comes to environmental sustainability, when it comes to food systems, when it comes to global sustainable development. And the book is a celebration. I just wanted to celebrate the work that many indigenous communities, organizations, NGOs, communities, grassroots have been working towards repatriating cultures of well-being. And here, as an example, I work with the Slow Food Peru. RICA is a Maori organization that focuses on school lunches and teaching how to cultivate, how to cook healthy Maori traditional foods for children aged between 2 to 12. We have Chirapac, one of the largest indigenous organizations in Latin America, based in Peru, that focus on revitalizing cultures, languages, revitalizing food systems. Here, example of the kids from RECA, and also another organization that I've been working with is the Papatunu Kumarai, which you will hear in the book. They're doing amazing work and moving towards indigenous entrepreneurship, which is another area that we're focusing on. And also during my time in the University of Wisconsin, I built relationships with the Menominee Nation, and they have a college, one of the largest college that they focus on sustainable traditions based on Kant philosophies. The work that I do is the local level, focusing on now more so on repatriating holistic collective well-being, focusing on cultural biodiversity, cultural diversity, focusing on indigenous agroecology, food sovereignty, security, nutrition, which is very important, indigenous cuisine, and entrepreneurship. Here's an example. Maori chef has been leading the way. Peter Gordon has been leading the way and establishing Maori-based restaurants that every single Wednesday they will provide a community day, inviting schools, inviting grassroots organizations, and he will provide all the ingredients. And our role was just to be able to learn about cooking a Maori dish. So there was the part of the indigenous food sovereignty. So Peter Gordon is doing a really good job, especially with the kids and schools. Here also, I had a privilege to host Maori, Quechua, Onondaga, who are the Native American peoples in Syracuse, where I'm based right now, be able to host symposiums, be able to host food sovereignty events where I was able to convene all of them. So I was very happy to convene Tarsila from Chirapac. She's the founder. We have Maori colleagues and we have Angie. There we are in the Onondaga native farm where they hold over 2,400 varieties of seeds. So back in 1776, the president back then, George Washington, wanted to assimilate Native Americans. What he did was burned something that's very valuable for them back then, seeds. So he went to and asked to burn all the seeds of the Onondaga people. But were a few seeds that were saved. So slowly, the Onondaga people have been able to repatriate the seeds. And it's been a process of over a decade. So now Engie has 2,500 varieties of seeds. So I'm working in that space with them at the local level and to elevate the voices in the global level. And I'm part of various United Nations and UNESCO initiatives. I call this my labor of love because trust me, it's a lot of labor of love. It's not paid. You have to do a lot of work and reports, but you have to do it because I acknowledge the work of my elders and all the work that the hard work that they did to pave the way for young Indigenous scholars to continue with the work. So the labor of love continues in various reports. And I'm glad that at least now they're inviting us to be part of those discussions. And Aotearoa, they have the saying that if don't invite us, we'll make it to a table, we'll make our own table. And they've been making their own table over the past decade. And now we continue also working together, but also being able to be in work on international spaces to ensure that the knowledge system it resonates with what the report is saying. That when they write about food security, what are the voices of indigenous food traditions and food systems, indigenous knowledge? When it comes to many EPES reports, there is now a task force based on 7 indigenous scholars globally. So our role is to ensure that every single report will resonate with indigenous practices, worldviews, and be part of those conversations and dialogues. So it's a lot of work, but I am enjoying that. And as I said, we as part of the Indigenous Global Movement, we're very grateful that we're seeing a change from how it started to now. I can feel and I can see more books. This is the third book that focuses on Indigenous food sovereignty. The first one by my lovely Indigenous sister, Charlotte. She writes about Indigenous food sovereignty. So now they are small but growing body of scholarship that focuses on stories about food systems, sustainability, politics, but written by Indigenous scholars. And that for us is very important because we want our voices to be heard and be part of those conversations. On the 6th of August, when the book was born, I had a beautiful sunrise ceremony with my Quechua relatives. So I just wanted to show you the pictures. I went back, and for me that was important to go back and be in ceremony and welcome the birth of the book. And the book is being translated to Spanish as we speak. And I'm getting some funding to be translated to Quechua. So hopefully we'll have good news with that. And here we're celebrating with chicha de jora, which I mentioned in the book, which is a traditional drink based on fermented corn. So it was a beautiful ceremony. And recently I spent all February, March in Aotearoa having 5 book celebrations and presentations and with various Mali tribes, with the schools. It's very important that the kids come and know and learn about the book. So it was interesting to have a mixture of school kids, high school, tribal members, community members, academia, and of course we have lots of kaimoana, there's lots of Maori food in summer right now there, so it's seafood, just to show you the work that I do. And also my goal is for the book to continue to spark these conversations, continue to start discussing about potential collaborations with Indigenous and local communities. Geography might keep us apart, but shared traditions can bring us together. And I'm sure there will be more stories about one humble food crop or the food of the land and the sea that will unify us and will enable us to come together and share stories. As I said, shared stories can bring us together to build sustainable futures. And there's information about the book, and I will say sulpaki, kia ora, and thank you.